We're talking about corporations that are making millions of dollars, not in revenue, but in profit. And the second is taxing the top 1% of New Yorkers. We're talking about people who make $1 million a year or more, taxing them just by a flat 2% tax increase. And I know if 50 Cent is listening, he's not going to be happy about this. He tends to not like this tax policy, but I want to be very clear. This is about $20,000 a year. It's a rounding error. And all of these things together, they make every New Yorker's life better, including those who are actually getting taxed.
What if 50 Cent's viral RIPNYC meltdown was never just about higher taxes on the rich, but about something far bigger, far more personal, and far more calculated than anyone scrolling past his Instagram feed on November 4th realized? On the surface, we see a Queens-born rap mogul reacting in real time to Zohran Mamdani's landslide win in the 2025 New York City mayoral race, posting an AI-generated tombstone that reads RIPNYC, founded 1624, passed away 2025, right after the results came in on election night. We see him warning that big money will flee and that the city is finished once a 34-year-old Democratic socialist and the first Muslim mayor in the city's history takes office in January 2026. But when we look closer at the timing, the history, and the money on the table, we start to see a different picture forming, one where 50 Cent is not just venting, but positioning himself on the front lines of a culture and cash war over who really owns New York's future.
You know, what I would say to you, 50, if you are indeed watching, or anyone else who's watching this show, is I continue to think that having the top 1% of New York City, who are making more than $1 million a year, having them pay 2% more for an economic agenda that would transform every New Yorker's life, including their own.
Because on that same night, while networks called the race and headlines focused on Mamdani defeating Republican Curtis Sliwa and former Governor Andrew Cuomo, 50 wasn't just tossing out a meme. He was stacking posts. First, the tombstone on November 4th, then the now deleted shot of a red Yankee cap next to a bottle from his own beverage brand, with a caption captured by outlets that read, in essence, that New York was over and it was time to pack up and go. Then, another clip of Mamdani's victory speech with the 3-word prediction. No funding coming, NYC finished. Each post hit within hours of Mamdani's win, at the exact moment his proposal to raise corporate taxes and add a 2% surcharge on incomes over $1 million a year shifted from theory to incoming policy. On paper, Mamdani's plan is straightforward. Impose that extra 2% on the city's top 1% of earners, push the corporate tax rate into roughly 11.5% territory, and use the billions raised annually to fund public services, from transit to housing to sanitation. His campaign pitch, repeated in interviews with national outlets in late 2025, framed it as an agenda to transform every New Yorker's life, not just those already in luxury zip codes. He beat Cuomo and Sliwa by campaigning on rent freezes, free buses, universal childcare, and a rebalanced property tax system that stops giving sweetheart deals to billionaire towers on Central Park South, while outer borough homeowners get squeezed. Voters knew this on November 4th, and they still handed him the win.
All right. You have spoken about these financial plans you have, and you made a point on New York radio, which a lot of people listen to address 50 Cent. And you know he's a critic.
He's a critic
of high taxes.
But let me tell you.
Go ahead, and then we'll play it. Go ahead.
I didn't even know what my salary would be until I opened up Instagram and I saw this thing, which was like 50 Cent offers Mamdani X amount of money.
Yeah.
I was like, that's a very specific amount of money.
But the minute that vision became real with ballots, 50 Cent doubled down. In one Instagram post that circulated back in June, months before the general election, he had already threatened to pay Mamdani $258,750 plus a first-class one-way ticket away from NY, asking out loud, "Where did he come from? Whose friend is this?" That offer resurfaced in coverage once Mamdani actually won, turning what could have been written off as a one-off rant into a clear pattern. We now have a Queens rapper who left New York for Houston in 2021, in part to escape higher federal taxes under President Joe Biden, suddenly casting himself as the voice of the city, warning that a 2% local surcharge will trigger a purge of the wealthy. We can't ignore how neatly that narrative lines up with certain political interests. In that same June post, 50 threatened to tell Donald Trump about Mamdani's agenda. And in later commentary, he pushed the idea that all roads lead to Shreveport, his new entertainment hub in Louisiana, where he's leasing studio space and planning a multi-million-dollar production district. On one level, that is just brand synergy. Scare rich New Yorkers, point them south toward his new empire, and profit from the relocation story. But insiders close to Republican fundraising circles have already suggested that high-profile figures attacking progressive city leaders on tax grounds often find themselves courted as informal messengers, especially when they have massive social media reach and a history of endorsing or flirting with conservative candidates. Meanwhile, Mamdani didn't respond with personal insults. In interviews on outlets like CNN and MSNBC, he stayed on message. He repeated that asking the top 1% to pay 2% more would fund an economic agenda that benefits every resident, including those at the top. He even admitted that, despite the online feud, he still listens to 50's 2003 track, Many Men, Wish Harm, whenever he receives threats. making clear that the artist's catalog and the artist's politics sit in two different lanes for him. That kind of answer plays well with younger voters who already see Mamdani as a relatable figure, a former aspiring rapper who once went by Mr. Cardamom and has spent years representing Queens in the state assembly before this mayoral leap.
Well, you take many men for motivation. I was going to say your answer sounds a little bit like clickety-clank, the money goes into my piggy bank.
Wow.
And if we had more time, we'd do more 50. Can we do?
But if Mamdani tried to keep it light verbally, he sent a very different signal through his music choice on election night. When he walked out to deliver his victory speech, he didn't pick an uplifting neutral anthem. He chose Ja Rule's New York, a track tightly bound to one of 50 Cent's most infamous rap conflicts. That moment, captured on video at his November 4th victory party, was not accidental. It was a pointed shot straight at a long-standing cultural rivalry, a way of telling New York that he understands the city's hip-hop history just as deeply as its housing policy. Industry observers have already framed this as Mamdani using the language of rap beef to send a message. 50 Cent might have declared the city finished, but the new mayor is aligning himself with the very figures who once stood against 50 in music. Behind that choice sits an even deeper contradiction. 50 Cent built his mythology on New York streets, telling stories of surviving an attempt on his life in 2000 and grinding his way out of Queens to global stardom. Yet by 2021, he had publicly celebrated moving to Houston, complaining on social media about higher tax rates under Democratic leadership and hinting at support for Trump-style economic policies. When he now warns that Mamdani's surcharge will run the big money out of the city and trigger chaos if policing budgets are touched, critics point out that he is making these claims from outside city limits, all while plotting to centralize his business world in tax-friendlier states like Texas and Louisiana.
So yeah, we need to fix those things. Those things, in my opinion, are not Democrat, they're not Republican, they're not flaws of capitalism, they're not flaws of socialism. They are bad policy, badly executed. And so anyone who wants to fix those things, I'm all in. This mayor here, that was all he cared about. I want to fix the potholes, I want to reduce crime, I want the schools to work, I want to bring jobs. And you know what? Unemployment here, 23% to 7%. And this city had gone bankrupt.
Right.
And now it's investment grade.
That is why the backlash to his RIP NYC posts was so intense. In comment sections documented by outlets covering the feud, users accused him of forgetting the public support that helped him as a young man, from taxpayer-funded hospital care to food assistance for his family. They called him a sellout, said the man who once hustled in Queens now fears a 2% surcharge he can easily afford, and predicted he would soon be posing in Tel Aviv or other global hotspots while lecturing ordinary New Yorkers about sacrifice. Comedians and commentators like D.L. Hughley amplified that criticism, arguing that wealthy entertainers stayed quiet while Trump cut food stamps and weaponized hunger, only to start panic messaging when someone like Mamdani suggests taxing seven-figure incomes to fund rent relief and public transit. This is where the rumors start to thicken. Sources close to progressive strategists say they see 50's posts as part of a wider effort by ultra-wealthy donors and corporate interests to brand Mamdani as anti-business before he even takes office. Those sources point to the way his victory triggered not just entertainment world outbursts, but also warnings from finance figures who, in the lead-up to the election, threatened to move money to Florida if he won, only to change tone once the result became inevitable. One hedge fund billionaire, who spent months attacking Mamdani online and promising to leave the city, reportedly sent a congratulatory message after the win and offered to help NYC instead of booking a flight out. That pattern is familiar. The rich threaten to go, the voters call their bluff, and suddenly the same people who said they were done with New York are looking for seats at the new table. For critics of 50 Cent, his all roads lead to Shreveport line and his relocation narrative fit neatly into that old playbook. The scare talk comes first, the adaptation comes later, and the goal is always to keep tax obligations as low as possible while still benefiting from the city's massive economic engine. For his defenders, though, there's another angle. Some industry sources claim 50 is genuinely worried that aggressive tax and regulatory changes could slow down investment in creative industries, including studios, streaming projects, and live events that rely on high net worth backers who can just as easily build in Texas, Georgia, or Louisiana.
So, first of all, people have left New York City. You've seen hedge funds and certain banks and Ken Griffin, and I think it's a bad idea. I mean, you want to have a very competitive city, and I don't want to use labels. The important thing to me is policies that actually work. Do you make crime better? Do you make the schools better? Do you make the health system better? I want to lift up all citizens too. I've seen a lot of mayors and governors say things like that, and they fail to do it because their policies may not be so bad, but the implementation stinks.
But then we come back to the Trump thread because 50's mention that he would tell Trump about Mamdani's plans was not dropped in a vacuum. Former Governor Cuomo warned during the final mayoral debate that a Mamdani victory would be a dream for Trump, predicting that the former president would try to take over New York if a young Democratic socialist ran it. Mamdani fired back by calling Cuomo Trump's puppet, arguing that the real danger was a moderate Democrat too willing to accommodate the White House. Now we have 50 signaling that he will carry Mamdani's quotes straight to Trump, at the exact moment national conservatives are looking for high-visibility examples of progressive cities to attack as cautionary tales. We also can't ignore the law and order angle. In his November posts, 50 suggested that if Mamdani defunds the police, the city will experience a purge-style collapse, referencing a 2020 social media post where the then Assemblymember used the slogan, "Defund the NYPD." Since then, Mamdani has publicly moderated that stance, telling reporters in July that he is not defunding the police, and even promising to ask the current police commissioner, Jessica Tisch, to stay on. That evolution reflects his shift from activist outsider to mayor-elect dealing with entrenched institutions. But 50's choice to ignore the update and stick to the 2020 slogan lets him frame the incoming administration as a danger to public safety, even as Mamdani reassures anxious moderates that he will keep core security structures in place.
And my job as someone who believes deeply in the public sector is to ensure that we're delivering public excellence. And that means every dollar that we raise, I want to be able to prove to you that it's every dollar that's being well spent. That's the relationship there. And I do have to say, even though we have a disagreement on tax policy, every time I get a threat, I still listen to many men.
Meanwhile, Mamdani's campaign showed how deeply he understands the power of culture and politics. He appeared on hip-hop-centric media like Hot 97, The Breakfast Club, and newer shows like Flagrant, using those platforms across 2024 and 2025 to sell his affordability message in the same spaces where rap controversies usually trend. He referenced the Drake-Kendrick showdown as a metaphor for disciplined messaging, saying in one interview that Kendrick's focus in that feud inspired his own approach in debates against Cuomo and Sliwa. He walked the 2025 Pride March in June, worked the crowd like a veteran, and anchored his rallies with chants of "tax the rich" that resonated with millennials and Gen Z residents who have watched rents skyrocket for a decade. All of this leaves 50 Cent in a complicated position, a Queens legend turned national business figure who now finds himself framed as the face of backlash against a mayor that many younger New Yorkers see as the first real shot at rewriting the city's social contract in decades. If he backs down, he risks looking like another billionaire-adjacent figure who cried crisis and then adapted once the new rules kicked in. If he digs in, he invites even more scrutiny into his own tax moves, relocation decisions, and political alliances, especially any behind-the-scenes ties to Trump world operatives eager to use RIP NYC as a fundraising slogan.
It's a center for us, but my question really saying is, New York has to compete. No city has divine right to success. There are great cities everywhere. We now have more people in Texas than we have in New York. That didn't have to be that way, and so if I was any mayor of any city, I'd be thinking about what do I need to do to build a great city to help all of my citizens, and all the things that create good competition.
And through it all, we still have that image from election night: Mamdani walking out to J. Rule's New York, smiling as the crowd roars, turning a 20-year-old rap rivalry into a live political moment aimed straight at 50's legacy. It was more than a petty troll. It was a way of saying that the cultural capital 50, once wielded as the voice of the streets, now has competition in City Hall itself. For some insiders, that is the real trigger behind the meltdown, the feeling that a new generation is using hip-hop's own playbook to challenge the old guard on money, on power, and on who gets to decide when New York is really finished and when its next chapter is just beginning. Even as the first shot in that shadow war is still echoing and the next moves from both men remain just out of view, then comes the conspiracy angle that more than one political operative quietly raises. Was 50 Cent's outrage genuine, or was he being nudged as a pawn in a much bigger game involving real estate moguls, nervous bankers, and national operatives eager for a new, dangerous, progressive city to point to? Lobbyists tied to Manhattan property interests have spent years fighting reforms to the broken tax system that lets certain billionaires pay less on Central Park South penthouses than outer borough homeowners pay on modest houses. Mamdani's platform goes straight at that imbalance, promising to shift the burden away from working neighborhoods and toward glass towers. If insiders are right, that made him a serious problem for people who prefer the status quo. And in that context, a charismatic artist with a history in Queens, a national following, and clear ties to lower tax states becomes a very useful megaphone. At the same time, other celebrities' reactions expose how fluid these alliances really are. Some entertainers who had stayed quiet during the race suddenly jumped in after 50's posts, echoing generic warnings about driving investors away, or turning NYC into another failed experiment, only to soften their tone once Mamdani's victory margin made his mandate undeniable. One Queens-born rapper who had previously campaigned for Eric Adams was seen liking pro-Mamdani posts after the election, while a Harlem veteran who once mocked Democratic socialists began sharing clips about rent relief and free transit on his stories. The rap community, largely absent during the hardest months of the campaign, started to reposition once it became clear that Mamdani was not fading away, but preparing to govern, and that public opinion among younger fans strongly favored his agenda.
What do you say to him now where, and by the way, he has moved out of the city, but he's a classic New Yorker. I'm sure you like some of his songs.
Oh, man. It's actually tough for me in that way.
Yeah, so where does this debate go?
Incredible songs.
Because his argument, and it's fun, but it's also what we hear from certain people. His argument is There are a lot of people in New York who make a lot of money because they contribute a lot, and you're going after them.
Among billionaires, the swing was even more naked. That hedge fund figure who promised Florida but never left is just one example. People close to Wall Street describe a now familiar script. Pre-election, the threats to relocate and the donations to anyone who might stop Mamdani. Post-election, the Zoom calls and invitations to private dinners aimed at educating the new mayor while keeping their influence intact. Jamie Dimon's "If he becomes mayor, so be it" line captured that realism. They might not like the slogan, "tax the rich," but they recognize that New York's size and infrastructure tie their fortunes to the city, whether they like it or not. Which is exactly why framing Mamdani as so extreme that he would force their hand was so valuable before November 4th and so awkward afterwards when the ballots came in and the markets did not crash. The larger pattern here ties directly into the rise of progressive politics across U.S. cities and the counteroffensive from the ultra-wealthy. From L.A. to Chicago and now New York, candidates who talk openly about rent freezes, public transit investment, and wealth taxes have faced not only traditional negative ads, but also influencer-driven campaigns designed to make their policies sound like apocalypse. With Mamdani, the narrative leaned heavily on public safety, repurposing a 2020 Defund the NYPD post, even after he clarified in July 2025 that he was not defunding the police and promised to keep Commissioner Jessica Tisch. 50's line about a purge if police budgets change did not match the updated reality, but matched a tested talking point. The same script played out in other cities. An NYC scale made this chapter especially valuable for national strategists plotting 2026 and 2028.
The concern that I have so often is also driven by a question of the unique complicity we have as Americans in what we are funding, what we are actually complicit in by virtue of our tax dollars being spent on it. And that's something that I think motivates many to ensure that those tax dollars are a reflection of our morals.
All right.
And while all of this unfolds, there's the human cost on the ground. Mamdani has talked openly about getting threats and turning to 50's own track Many Men for motivation, a detail he shared on air when asked how he handles the darker side of public life. For him, the song is not about glorifying conflict, but about pushing through when nameless voices want to shut him down. That twist, where the politician keeps streaming the artist even as the artist publicly attacks him, adds a strange, almost ironic layer. It underlines a generational divide where younger voters separate art from politics more easily, even as older power brokers try to use artists as political weapons. It also hints at why Mamdani has mostly refused to escalate the feud beyond a few sharp responses. And that pointed Ja Rule music cue. He does not need to win a sparring match with 50 to hold office, but he does need to keep his coalition focused on housing, transit, and wages. If we zoom out, 50 Cent's meltdown starts to look less like a lone rant and more like the visible tip of a deeper iceberg, a mesh of money, messaging, and fear running beneath the surface of New York's transformation. On one side, a mayor-elect with a thin resume on paper, but a thick base of grassroots energy, endorsed by few establishment bigwigs, but quietly checked in on by figures like Barack Obama and watched closely by Wall Street. On the other, a constellation of legacy politicians, corporate donors, and cultural heavyweights anxious about what happens when someone who owes them nothing walks into City Hall with a mandate from renters, riders, and underpaid workers. And caught between them is a city that has seen reformers come and go before, sometimes crashing against the same old machine, sometimes shifting it an inch at a time.
It is Tuesday, and the thing that I think is most important is to be honest with New Yorkers and to make promises that I can keep. And I want to be very, very intentional about what I share with New Yorkers and where I stand. That's why I'm taking the time that I am. As soon as I get to the decision, I've now promised probably 4 reporters, but now I'll stay to the 5th.
Okay.
I'll also be sharing it with you, my friend.
So we are left with a question that goes far beyond one AI tombstone and a couple of angry captions. Because the truth is, this was never just about 50 Cent versus Zohran Mamdani. It was about power. It was about control. It was about who gets to decide what New York is worth and who deserves to stay when the rules change. Was 50 really sounding an honest alarm, or playing a role in a script written in boardrooms we never see? And when the cameras move on, will the real puppet master stay hidden, or will one leaked message, one flipped insider, blow the whole game open? Tell us what you think, because this story is still unfolding and we will be right here watching it with you. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and take care.